There's something we are rarely told, that the feeling of emptiness is not always a problem that needs fixing. In a world that constantly pushes you to be full of tasks, full of goals, full of motivation, the moment you feel empty, it's immediately labeled as failure. But sometimes that emptiness appears only after you've just let go of what no longer belongs to you. When you sit still and are no longer pulled by tasks that must be finished, by questions that must be answered, by roles that must be maintained, a very real silence emerges. No schedule, no notifications, no one needing you to be someone. And in that silence, for the first time, you hear yourself more clearly. And often, what you hear is not a strong voice, but an emptiness, a space where layers of pressure, responsibility, and expectation once piled up. When all of that settles, you look inward and don't immediately find something to hold on to. So you begin to think that something is wrong with you, that you lack motivation, that you don't have enough passion, that you're hollow, that without something to do, you are nothing. But maybe that emptiness isn't a lack at all. Maybe it's simply the absence of the things you've been using for years to cover yourself. The packed schedules, the goals borrowed from others, the roles you played to be accepted. When those layers temporarily fall away, what you see is a void. Not because there's nothing inside you, but because you've never stayed long enough with yourself to know what's truly there. And that emptiness, as frightening as it may feel, is the only place where a real human being can begin to appear. We've lived in busyness for far too long. Not only busy with work, but busy with everything. Busy replying to messages, busy following the news, busy scrolling through other people's lives, busy updating, busy reacting, busy proving that we're still present. Empty space in the day becomes something suspicious. If you're not doing anything, it feels like you're falling behind. We stay busy so we don't have to think. Because if we think, questions might surface. Questions about direction, about meaning, about whether we're living in a way that's true to ourselves. And those questions aren't comfortable. So we fill them with schedules, with tasks, with noise. We stay busy so we don't have to feel. Because feeling can hurt. Feeling can be exhausting. Feeling can bring up unnamed sadness we don't know how to handle. So we keep ourselves occupied. Always something to do. Always something to focus on. So we don't have to touch what's inside. We stay busy to avoid questions that don't come with neat answers. Questions like, what am I living for? If I'm not what I do, who am I? Is this life truly mine? Those questions can't be solved in one evening. So we choose not to let them appear. And that's why, when everything finally stops, when the calendar is empty, when the phone goes silent, when no one needs you to be anyone, the first feeling is rarely peace. It's emptiness. A silence you don't know what to do with. A space no longer filled by tasks, by roles, by validation. And emptiness frightens us. Not because it hurts, but because within that emptiness, there's nowhere left to hide from ourselves. But try to look at that emptiness from a different angle. Not as a lack that needs to be filled immediately, but as a space that has just been opened. Like a room that has finally been cleared after being crowded for far too long. Old items have been taken out. Things that were once necessary, but now only took up space. Corners that were hidden are finally touched by light. The air in the room feels different. Lighter. Even if, at first glance, it looks empty. The dust of habits, of expectations, of roles, has been swept away. All that I must, all that I should, all that others expect me to. These things once filled your inner space completely. When they fall away, you look inside and see a void. Not because there's nothing there, but because for the first time, you're no longer blocked by what was never truly you. The room is empty. No familiar furniture. Nothing to lean on. No borrowed sense of, I'm fine. But it isn't meaningless. It simply hasn't been arranged yet. You don't know what you want to place there. You don't know which colors truly belong to you. You don't know what this space will become. And that is not failure. That is the beginning. Because you can't discover what the room could be if you rush to put the old things back in. Just because you're afraid of the emptiness. Many people return to old habits, old goals, old roles. Not because they are right, but because they are familiar. But if you can stay a little longer in that empty room, you may begin to hear a very different question. What kind of space do I truly want to live in? When you sit still and feel empty, that is not proof that you are empty. It is only proof that, in that moment, you are no longer being pulled by the things that once defined you. No work to stay busy with. No one waiting for your reply. No schedule to hold on to. The layers you've worn all day long have just been taken off. And inside, you find an open space. That space exists not because you have nothing inside you, but because you've never stayed long enough with yourself to discover what is there. This is a feeling many people encounter on quiet evenings, on rare days off, or in moments when life suddenly slows down. You don't know what to do with the time. You don't know what to think. And it becomes easy to conclude that you're useless. But in truth, you're simply not used to not being occupied. You don't need to fill it immediately. You don't need to rush into a new goal just to feel like you're heading somewhere. You don't need to jump into a new project just to feel valuable. You don't need to put on a new role just to escape uncertainty. Because so many things we choose out of fear of emptiness are simply old patterns, wearing new clothes. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stay in that emptiness a little longer, long enough for the restlessness to soften, long enough to stop running, long enough for something more honest to begin to surface. Not a plan, not a grand goal, but a very small, very genuine feeling of, how do I truly want to live? And only from there can you begin to place things into that open space, not to cover it up, but to build a life that actually belongs to you. Emptiness is not the end. It is not the place where everything stops. It is a buffer. The space between what has fallen away and what has not yet been placed. A breath after a long run. A rare moment when you are no longer defined by what you do. In that space, a real person can begin to appear. Not the version that gets praised, not the version that gets accepted, but the version that doesn't need to prove anything. And when you stay in that emptiness long enough, a very different question slowly begins to rise. Not loudly, not urgently, just honestly. If not to please anyone, not to keep up with anyone, not to fit into any mold, then how do I want to live? Not living correctly, but living in a way that belongs. And from that question, an even deeper one opens. Not about dreams, not about goals, but about the right to choose. How much of this life is something you truly chose? And how much of it did you simply follow because you never stopped long enough to ask?